Imagine waking up one morning in the 1960s, turning on your radio, and hearing that the world might be on the edge of nuclear war. That was the kind of tension people lived with during the Cold War, time when the United States and the Soviet Union weren't directly fighting, but they were constantly competing and threatening each other in ways that could have turned deadly at any moment. Today, we're diving into why the Cold War almost turned hot, following the timeline of crises that brought the world frighteningly close to disaster. The Cold War wasn't like World War II, where armies faced off in big battles. Instead, it was about power, politics, and influence. The US and the Soviet Union were the two superpowers, and both wanted to prove their way of life was better. The US pushed democracy and capitalism, while the Soviets pushed communism. It was like a high-stakes chess game, but the pieces were real people, real countries, and very real nuclear weapons. One of the first big crises came in 1948 with the Berlin Blockade. After World War II, Germany was divided into zones controlled by the Allies, but Berlin, right in the middle of Soviet-controlled East Germany, became a major flashpoint. The Soviets blocked all road and rail routes to West Berlin, hoping to starve the city into submission. But the US and its allies responded with the Berlin Airlift, flying in food, coal, and supplies nonstop for nearly a year. Imagine planes landing every few minutes, day and night, just to keep a city alive. It worked, and the Soviets eventually backed down, but this showed how quickly things could escalate. Fast forward to 1950, the Korean War erupted. North Korea, backed by the Soviets and China, invaded South Korea, supported by the US and United Nations forces. This was the first time the Cold War turned into an actual shooting war, and it was brutal. Millions died, and even though the fighting ended in 1953, the Korean peninsula remains divided to this day. Many feared that Korea could easily have spiraled into World War III if nuclear weapons had been used. Then came 1956, the Hungarian Uprising. Hungarians rose up against Soviet control, hoping the West would come to their aid. But when Soviet tanks rolled into Budapest, crushing the resistance, the US and its allies stood by, unwilling to risk direct war with Moscow. It was a heartbreaking reminder of how dangerous open confrontation could become. By 1961, tensions rose again with the building of the Berlin Wall. Overnight, East German soldiers and workers started putting up barbed wire and concrete, literally dividing families and cutting off escape routes to the west. US and Soviet tanks even faced each other at Checkpoint Charlie, their guns ready. For a few days, it looked like a spark could ignite global war. Luckily, leaders on both sides pulled back, but the wall became the ultimate symbol of the Cold War divide. And then, the scariest moment of all, the Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962. The Soviets secretly placed nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from Florida. When American spy planes discovered them, President John F. Kennedy demanded their removal and ordered a naval blockade. For 13 terrifying days, the world held its breath. Soviet ships carrying missiles steamed toward Cuba, while U.S. forces prepared for nuclear war. Can you imagine? People really thought the end of the world was near. In the end, a deal was struck. The Soviets removed their missiles from Cuba, and secretly, the U.S. promised to remove its missiles from Turkey. It was the closest the Cold War ever came to turning hot, but the crises didn't stop there. In 1968, Czechoslovakia tried reforms during the Prague Spring, only for Soviet tanks to roll in again. In the 1970s and 80s, proxy wars in Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Africa kept the Cold War simmering. Each time, the US and the Soviets fought indirectly through allies, weapons, and money, careful not to confront each other directly. Both sides knew a direct clash could mean mutual destruction. By the 1980s, the nuclear arms race reached insane levels. Both sides had enough bombs to destroy the world several times over. People lived under the constant shadow of nuclear war, with drills and schools where children were told to duck and cover. Of course, Hiding under a desk wouldn't have saved anyone from a nuclear blast, but it shows the kind of fear ordinary people lived with. Finally, leaders like Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev started to talk about peace. They signed arms reduction treaties, and the Soviet Union began to weaken from within. By 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, and in 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, ending the Cold War without it ever turning into a full-scale hot war. Looking back, it is almost unbelievable how many times the world stood on the edge of disaster, from Berlin to Korea, from Cuba to Prague. The Cold War teaches us an important lesson that even when nations disagree, communication and restraint can save humanity from destruction. So what do you think? Do you believe we're safer today than people were during the Cold War? Or do new tensions in the world mean history could repeat itself? Share your thoughts in the comments, because I'd love to hear your perspective. And if you enjoyed this journey through the Cold War's close calls, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss more fascinating stories from history. Thanks for watching, and remember, even in the darkest times, there's always hope for peace.